There was this sort of divide where like East Coast became really about brand management, and there was this West Coast rise around performance marketing and sort of direct response.
There are some things that robots are great at, and there are some things that humans are great at.
I no longer have a creative agency on retainer. It's gone. And we spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year in marketing.
Where the data tells a story that's gotta be told. It's the art and the science, get the numbers right.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Brandformance. Today is a very special episode with Vineet Mehra, who is the Chief Growth and Marketing Officer at Chime. If you haven't heard Vineet before, you're in for a treat. In addition to Chime, his experience at Walgreens, Good Eggs, Ancestry, Johnson & Johnson, and P&G before that makes him one of the top CMOs in the industry today. Together, we explored the false divide between brand and performance, the CAC Valley of Death, and how AI is changing the profession as we know it. So let's dive straight in. All right. Vineet, this has been a long time in the making. I'm super excited about this episode. And the reason for that, and I even wore my Chime green today,
Nice.
specifically for this podcast, Go Chime. And the reason I'm excited about this conversation a lot is I think you're one of those unique people in the market that talk about this, the whole thesis of this podcast, right? Brand, performance, are these distinct things? Are these same? And so I'm super excited about getting into all of it. But first, welcome and thank you for joining us on this podcast.
Thanks for having me, Pranav, and congrats on all the success so far with Paramark and how that's going.
Thank you. We appreciate that. So much more to do. We are just getting started. But first question that I like to ask. So what is a brand that you are jealous of right now in terms of their marketing? Who do you think is doing some exceptional work in the industry right now?
Well, I really believe that marketing is going through a major, and we'll talk a lot about this, a major shift. And I get jealous of brands that are sort of entertainment platforms at their core, because I think that's what stands out. So I look at my son, I look at his friends, I look at the world, and I think of a brand like YouTube. They have just, they could have been anything, but they've hit the cultural zeitgeist. They are at the center of most conversations. And man, they've done a great job just becoming sort of central to how culture is shaped, formed, and communicated.
That's a great answer. And not a lot of people talk about it, but just you look at how much of our time we spend on YouTube and now YouTube TV, and it's wild, right? All of the NBA games. I know you're a big hoop fan, and so am I, and it's all YouTube TV.
Yeah, it's YouTube TV, and I think I read a stat that over half of all even just YouTube viewing hours are now on the big screen, right? So it's
Oh,
really
wow.
come off mobile onto the big screen. So they've done an unbelievable job, and it could have just been a video app, but I think they've made it so much more than that.
One of the best acquisitions to ever go down in history.
100%.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I noticed going into the new year was I noticed that you have evolved your role from a CMO title to a Chief Growth Officer title. And there's a Chief Growth and Marketing Officer, I think. So talk to me about sort of, growth has always been part of the marketing remit, like, hey, what are we doing if we're not doing, growth? But I'm curious, what was the inspiration behind this for the business and for you personally? Like, what led to this transition? And we can dig into that a little bit more for our audience and how marketers should think about marketing versus growth and what's practically different between the two things.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the core of it, you're right. I think the best CMOs and the best boards and executive teams hold their marketing leaders accountable for growth. And that's growth with a capital G, right? That's not just brand, and that's not just sort of equities and kind of, getting attention. It means business metrics and really driving the outcomes that, an investor would want in your business. So I don't think that's ever changed, but I think more and more what's happening, and I think you're going to see this kind of mergence of these roles more and more. For me, this is probably the third time, right? I've had this sort of thing happen. It just recognizes that growth is a team sport, right? It's not just about a marketing function. in a lot of technology companies, you really need to make the full funnel work, right? You need product talent, analytics talent, engineering talent, marketing talent to kind of put it all together. And a modern growth function connects the dots across these and sort of looks at PLG motions or product-led growth motions, paid motions, organic motions, right? And so I think all this really recognizes is that it's giving me just much more direct ownership and accountability over a lot of our product engineering and analytics resources that are connected to the function of growth here at Chime. And it sort of just officializes that in some ways. But the truth is, whether you have the title or not, there's one way to drive growth, and that's as a team. And I think this just really recognizes, sort of officializes that in some ways here at Chime, at least.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's almost like I know you come from a consumer background. You've done a lot of work in CPG, and if you rewind the clock a little bit and go back a couple of decades, brand management at P&G or any of these leading sort of CPG companies was very much where marketing and growth and product and innovation and research and analytics were all kind of leading into that brand management function. So it's kind of what is old is new again to some degree in the tech ecosystem. But do you agree, or do you feel that it's different in some ways?
I think the tactics are very different. I did grow up in CPG back in the 90s when I started my career. That's where you went, right? If you can get into Procter and Gamble and P&G was famous for building general managers that were marketers, right? You learned to read a P&L, you built supply chains, you looked at the cogs of your product. So I think in that context, it was very much sort of a growth type idea, right? You were growing your business, and that meant not just the brand, but the financial kind of profile of your business, all the way from revenue down to the profitability of your brand. So in many ways, I think you're right, but the tactics have shifted, right? About, 10, 12 years ago, I moved to Silicon Valley, and direct to consumer business models are different. The language of growth is different. The way you talk about unit economics and payback periods are different because you have a direct relationship with the consumer. So you're right. In many ways, the CPG sort of brand manager was kind of a growth person. I say in many ways in CPG, the brand manager was the product manager also, right? And they were very much connected. Um, and in software businesses, it just works a little bit differently because the way you build the product and ship the product is very different. So, yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. Growth was probably around back then, right? If you think of it in that way. But I think the tactics and the language and the
Yep.
mechanics of growth have very much shifted as tech rises and definitely over the last 10 years has taken over.
Totally makes sense to me. And yeah, it's also reframe. I sometimes when I talk to my audience, I'm like, hey, growth is just marketing with a different label. And I'm sometimes being a little bit provocative in saying that. But you're right that the tactics are different, and you do have to study those tactics. And if you don't, then you can't apply the same sort of fundamental marketing principles to that growth stuff. And you do have to evolve your thinking and get sort of it's kind of like what's happening with AI. We'll get into that a little bit as well. But yesterday I opened my LinkedIn feed and I had you on the Think with Google podcast, I think, talking about Biggie and Tupac when you were talking about brand and performance. So I had to bring that up. And you've talked a lot about this false, dichotomy or divide between the two. And obviously we're on a podcast that's called Brandformance. So I'm very curious to, understand, when did you first realize that this split or divide was hurting companies and hurting the bottom line? And let's talk about that. When was it always the case that you had this in the back of your mind, or did you come to this realization at some point?
Well, this will be fun because to have this conversation, we get a little bit into the history of marketing, maybe a little bit. And the truth is, performance marketing as a term, and I deeply hate that term, so you're going to hear me say words like direct response instead.
Yeah.
But performance marketing as a term rose probably in the late-ish to kind of 2008, 2009, 2010, 11, somewhere in that range.
Yep.
And it really came out of the birth of these direct-to-consumer platforms like, search SEM with Google and then eventually Facebook back in the day. and the rise of sort of VC dollars, right? So up until about 2010-ish, I wouldn't say that was even really a term, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brand management and marketing was being led through CPG. You would like set your marketing, you would sort of forget it, you would measure it once a quarter and come back and kind of look at what you might adjust. And then all of the sudden in the 2010s, it started to rise. And we can go real deep into that conversation for sure. But that's really when I was in CPG. I dropped everything. I think I was like a president at J&J at the age of 30, running a massive division. And I was like, yeah, I've made it. And then the rise of performance marketing came, the venture capital word started, Silicon Valley invented all these new platforms. And I moved to Silicon Valley because I realized the world was changing and just thought I had to keep honing my craft. So I think it was really around the 2010s where I was like, wow, okay, this is going to change marketing. I didn't quite know how much or that this divide would exist the way it did, but I started to discover it when I moved here to Silicon Valley. And man, has a profound impact on marketing and really divided the industry quite a lot in
Yeah.
its early days and to this day, frankly.
Yeah, I mean that makes complete sense. And then the 2010s, when I view that whole time period, I moved to Valley in 2011 and spent time at mostly tech companies and kind of I was the growth person doing A/B testing and funnel optimization at all these companies. And I didn't really fully realize I was doing marketing-ish work, and it
Yeah.
was definitely the growth title back then. But over the course of that decade, I realized that was all part of marketing
Hmm.
and realizing the importance of storytelling. And then I heard you talk about this concept of performance storytelling. And so what is that? Let's break it down. Like tell me about sort of how you talk to your team about performance storytelling, and then we'll get into some specifics that I think you've really hit the nail on the head with sort of brand and performance and how to sort of optimize between the two. But we'll get into that. Tell me about performance storytelling.
Yeah. So, as I moved out here and started to see the rise of, performance marketing and having come from a CPG background, right, where storytelling and brand building was so core, I started to realize that there was this sort of divide, not just in our industry where like East Coast became really about brand management and there was this West Coast rise around performance marketing and sort of direct response. And I started to realize like, why is there this dichotomy? Like, right? It's like this Tupac Biggie thing that I you had heard me
Yep.
mention. It's sort of like you've got a West Coast, East Coast rivalry that was forming. And it got to the point where like CPG marketers were not very welcome in tech. And even
Mm,
inside of tech, you had really a divide between sort of product led growth motions, right? Things like funnel optimization, all of those things. And then, this thing on the side that was marketing and storytelling. And so performance storytelling was something that I had coined as a way of sort of organizing both of these thoughts of West Coast, East Coast, Tupac, Biggie, or more specifically, direct response and brand storytelling into one place. Or said another way, creating sort of a positioning and sort of interest in your brand that you can then capture with direct response, right? So it was my way of saying these two things don't have to be separate. Performance storytelling is the integration of the best of sort of brand building and sort of what the big companies have known for a long time and sort of the best of tech, which allowed you to create amazing unit economics and payback models for your marketing, which I think CPG lacked. So performance storytelling for me brought all of that together. And, I've been kind of riding that story ever since and really trying to break down this false dichotomy and this divisiveness that has happened in our industry. And I think the best marketers, the best growth leaders understand that you need both to win. Maybe not right from the start, and there's like phases a company goes through, but you definitely need both to win in the long run.
What's I love this concept and the way you broke it down. There's a couple of our customers, and obviously, you do a lot of this at Chime. There's one customer that's actually an upstart, right? I think they're a Series A or Series B startup. They're mobile, they're direct to consumer, and their biggest investment that has worked for them is actually influencer. So it's a very like you can be a Series A, Series B company in that PLG sort of growth cycle, and you're using influencer as the growth mechanism and then amplifying that influencer through paid. And if you think about it, that's very much similar to your concept of performance storytelling, because you're using those storytellers out there as a proxy for your brand, and then using your digital dollars to kind of grow that business. So I love that idea. Now, you also talk about this. You've repeated this to me many times in our previous chats. This CAC Valley of Death, right? And saying that you can go down that valley very quickly and be trapped by it. What is that CAC Valley of Death, and what are some signs that you look for that a brand might be going down that path?
Well, look, the world is littered with direct-to-consumer companies during the rise of performance marketing that sort of had this amazing 5, 6, 7-year run, right? They grew like crazy. They really got into the mix, and everyone was clicking on their Facebook ads, their search ads, right? And these were direct-to-consumer companies disrupting large players, whether there were kind of direct-to-consumer food companies or furniture companies, the mattress companies, right? They were all over the place. Beauty companies, the world
Yeah.
was littered with those. And actually, what you started to realize is that as they got kind of bigger, and many of them actually went public, many of them through SPACs, if you remember that whole world.
Yep.
Essentially, what happened was that they started to run out of steam, right? They started to sort of flatline a little bit, and the world is littered with these companies. And I believe these companies enter what I call the CAC Valley of Death. And what I mean by that essentially is that, this is where you have to understand how the best of what the big CPG have done for many years and what the best of direct to consumer companies have done. What the big CPGs understood is that you have to build future customers and future intent while you're capturing today's market, right?
Right.
So essentially what direct response does is, and how these DTC companies really grew, is there was just a lot of latent demand existing in the market for alternatives to the big brands, which have been around for 50 years, right? Like, it'd been the same brands with huge media moats around their businesses for many, many, many years, right? And so obviously consumers also want choice. So as the rise of kind of these platforms came where you could have kind of immediate response to media
Yeah.
dollars, venture capital came in and fueled these businesses. These businesses then needed to hit milestones at Series A, B, C to keep the runway going. So what performance marketing actually did, or direct response actually did back in the day, was it allowed you to take on some funding and then hit
Mm.
some metrics, prove out early unit economics along the way, and go from there in a way that sort of set it and forget it CPG marketing wasn't going to do, right? And
Right.
so what happened was, because there was all this latent demand and fresh dollars in all these new platforms like Facebook and Google, where they were getting all the eyeballs, all the attention, there was just a whole space, a white space where new dollars could enter. And essentially, they were sweeping up latent demand. So, I don't know, someone who had been buying the same, I don't know, cookie brand for the last 50 years, all of a sudden there was this direct to consumer cookie brand that was like
Yep.
unbelievably like unique. And you were like, yeah, I'll buy that, right? Because you just want to try something new, because we'd all been eating the same thing for 50 years. So essentially, this happened category after category after category. And what happens in direct response is ultimately you're bidding on current intent, right? For the most part. And
Mm.
as that current intent, as you start to swipe all of that up and you start to kind of get most of those customers into your ecosystem, that kind of the intent, kind of the supply of that intent goes down. And
Yep.
so it's almost like fish in a barrel, right? When you're shooting fish in a barrel, right? It's like there's all these fish in that barrel and you can kind of sweep it up. But as that goes down, supply goes down, but demand is still there. Essentially, what happens is prices start to go up because you have all these companies now bidding on those same customers, and supply starts to go down, prices start to go up. And at some point, what happens to these companies is they enter this CAC Valley of Death because they can't break out of this CAC increase cycle because there's no one else to bid on, because they're not building future customers. So when supply of intent goes down, CAC goes up because it's finite demand.
Yep.
And essentially, you start to hit this marginal return where the unit economics no longer justify growth dollars like in the early stages of a company. Companies flatline, they stop growing, they lose their multiple, and they end up becoming largely irrelevant because they can no longer find high ROI growth dollars to invest in. And so they enter what I call this CAC Valley of Death. And, the whole concept of performance storytelling is to bring these two things together so that, yes, sweep up the intent, do all of the goodness that DTC did for so long, and continue to build future customers so you keep putting the supply of that demand into this barrel so that as you're bidding and you're trying to win this intent off of sort of auctions and sort of, inflatable prices, that you're able to keep that in check as you go and keep investing the growth dollars as you move forward. So it's about continuing to create future demand and intent. It's about continuing to grow the LTV of your customer. And if you do those two things while you are sort of building an amazing unit economic direct response marketing engine, which you need to do, you can have a really long runway and, really avoid this CAC Valley of Death.
Hey folks, thanks for listening to this podcast today. If you're enjoying the show and if you're getting value out of it, we'd really appreciate if you drop us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting app. All right, people, if you're listening in, that last 5 minutes was an absolute masterclass in how to think about the economics of your business and the brand of your business and how those two things come together. But that was absolutely on point. And I wish every CMO, every VP of growth, every VP of brand is listening to this description, because this is the holy grail of how to think about it. And I will also say one thing, Paramark is a measurement company. And I can tell you, and you and I have talked about this, not every single piece of this can be measured to the dollar and to a 2 decimal point, precision. And you've got to be okay with it. You've got to be okay with that you're going to do your best job in trying to get to the precision on these things. But some things, an example being, lots of the big, sponsorships, you're just fighting against something that is not going to be direct, measurable in direct terms. So
you're right about that, but this is where there is a way to do this, right? It's not measurable, but what a lot of people do is say it's not measurable and put it on the side. I actually think the best CMOs and growth leaders are able to actually talk the love language of their CFO, right? And what I mean by that is create a framework within which you agree with the CFO. Like, look, my total dollars for growth are X. I will give you a payback period of Y, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, whatever is the kind of what your balance sheet, your business can afford. And I will give you an LTV to CAC of this, right? If you're able to sort of create that framing for your organization, right, then you're able to kind of have a portfolio-based conversation as opposed to trying to put a decimal place on everything. Now, there are things you can put a decimal place on, like you said, and there are things you can't. But the way to manage that with your executive team, with your board, with your investors, is to self-declare your payback constraints for the entirety of your budget. So for example, I tend to put the cost of my marketing org into my CAC. I put the cost of the cost of revenue into the CAC, right? Like these things really constrain you and give you a lot of credibility when you start to move into things like sponsorships, et cetera, where that exact thing may not be measurable, but the total kind of spend that I put into my organization is measurable. What that also does as a CMO is it forces you to work on kind of what I would call non-paid levers, right, for growth, product-led growth motions, SEO and organic growth, areas where you think of you're allocating capital like a portfolio. Think of yourself like almost like a fund manager at Vanguard or something, right? Where you need to return a certain amount. And, I think marketing would serve itself very well to think like that, almost like capital allocators to drive growth efficiently through a portfolio of tactics where it's pre-aligned with your CFO, your investors, and your board that if I stay within these constraints, give me the freedom within that framework.
I love it. Great answer to to my provocation that not everything is measurable. I love that answer. One question for you. Do you think about, within the Chime marketing and growth organization, do you think about sort of fostering, this might be a spicy one, competition between brand and direct response and, other parts? Or how do you set those teams up to have velocity and focus and vision, and while at the same time you're trying to grow really fast and bring everything together? Do you have any tactics or advice on how to do that well?
Yeah, there's some tricks of the trade, but I think one thing that's not talked about a lot, and we're all about spicy. I love spicy. Is there is a little bit of this brand and performance and sort of marketing and product thing that happens in tech. But what's not talked about enough is even within marketing, the performance or direct response teams and the brand teams do a lot of this. In fact, I was with a very well-known CMO of a large brand over the weekend, and she was telling my brand and my DR teams are just constantly fighting. So it is a very common thing if we're real about it, right? I try to think about this in a couple of ways. The first thing is and this is going to sound like kind of obvious, but it's hard to do. The first thing is I keep all my media dollars under one leader. What a lot of teams do is they put kind of brand media dollars over here or something else over here, and they try to create these divides. But the truth is, as a CMO and as an organization, I have to deliver a return on an investment, right, of X. And that's of my total investment, as we just talked about earlier. So by keeping the media dollars with one leader all the way up and down through the performance storytelling sort of continuum, what that does is it ensures that as a leader, I have one place to optimize the payback periods. What happens as a CMO is when you start to divide these dollars, you start to delegate complexity down, which is a big mistake. And second, you start to sort of have to connect the dots yourself by putting in one place, holding that person accountable for the total return on all of your investments. That really helps. That's job one. And I never split those media dollars. That's job one. Number two is, if you look at the way it's hiring and the way I build my team, some of the people on my team, a bunch of them are, ex-CMOs themselves. So I don't necessarily, for the heads of these roles, like my head of kind of what we call growth marketing or media understands brand. And my head of brand has led performance teams, right? My head of product marketing has been a CMO. So the other part of it is surrounding yourself with people who understand the performance storytelling theory, right? The concept that it is not one versus the other, right? It is the blend of these things that allow you to grow. And then obviously from time to time, I have to go in and tie breaks, right? And say, hey, look, we're going to shift these dollars here because we have a short-term need right now. Or, I'm going to keep investing in brand this time because I'm worried about what's happening to this CAC Valley of Death concept, right? So the CMO has to surround him or herself with people that understand the interplay of these two. And I think the days of folks that are on your leadership team that are just like silo thinkers, it's not going to work anymore. And, I think it's how you build the team. It's how you orchestrate the media out of one place. And then lastly, you get what you measure. So then it's about giving them the right goals and shared goals. So my brand leader and my growth leader share a CAC goal together.
Nice.
And now they may have some unique things, like my brand leader really looks at brand equity and some of those things, right, on his goals. My growth marketing leader, looks at some other things like, AEO visibility and things like that, right? But in the end, they both understand and shared with me that efficient growth is where it's at. And efficient growth means hitting your revenue or growth numbers along with a certain CAC constraint. If we do that together, it works. So it's three simple things, but they're really important things that I don't think everyone does.
That was again a masterclass. This is why I love having you on this podcast. It's fantastic. Okay, we're gonna pivot a little bit and switch gears, whatever the right analogy is. There's a lot of CMOs and heads of growth right now who are feeling a lot of pressure, and there's this, for good or for bad, I think mostly good, AI has taken over every aspect of our lives, right? And especially in marketing, there's a lot of talk of AI. And I feel like you are one of those people who made a conscious bet to say we're going to lean in and do more with AI. And so was there a particular time when you saw this and you felt like, okay, we just got to go all in? I feel like you do this many times in your career, right? You made that call to go into Silicon Valley, and then you're now making this call of like, hey, we're going to go all in on AI. Talk to me about sort of what that moment was. When did it click for you? And we'll talk about sort of AI adoption within your teams.
It's I think like for many people, it was the Chat GPT moment, right? I mean, I was blown away by that first version of Chat GPT. And I always say like today is the worst AI is ever gonna be. And I was just blown away by what this answer engine was essentially telling me and answering my questions. And over time, it just, obviously day one, it wasn't perfect, but it just improved and improved. And then one of the advantages of being in the Silicon Valley ecosystem is you meet with a lot of founders. And I really spend a lot of time in that venture ecosystem and meeting founders, such as yourself and others. And I was just blown away by the invention in the seed stage companies. And so I just had this between ChatGPT, which everyone had, and then this unique seat that I had a front row into what the next generation of founders were creating and like the early days of what an agent could do and the vision for that. I was just blown away. And then the creative tools started to come through. Remember when the first Sora release
Oh my
happened
God.
and
Yeah.
everyone was like talking about generative AI? I was just absolutely blown away, and it is proven to be true. I'm sure we'll get into it, but we have taken so many jobs to be done in our marketing department here at Chime and assigned sort of agentic or AI solutions to many of these. And look, maybe there's a bit of a bubble on the investing side, but it is not a bubble on the use case side. This is absolutely not vaporware, and it's going to completely and fundamentally transform how CMOs have to orchestrate their organizations, right? We're now not just growth architects, we're system architects. And the system is this combination of sort of, the tech platforms, the AI sort of tech that you have involved, but it's also now orchestrating a system of agents, right? Like this
Hmm.
idea of like infinite minds that you may be able to have in your organization, and this idea of orchestrating a workforce that's part kind of agent and part human, and where to create these intersections. It's a fascinating moment, and it's here to stay and only get more and more and more as we move forward.
Couldn't agree more. I'm very AI pilled right now myself, as you have to be. Like, if you're working with this tech, you can't possibly not be AI pilled. I'm curious, when you think about sort of the adoption of these tools and these agents within your team, has that been a challenge for you? Like, you're obviously on the cutting edge, right? You've always been sort of that type of person. You have a team of what, like 100, 200 marketers and product and whatever people, right? What's the adoption been from the ground up? Is there resistance? Is there no, like, let's go? Like, are there things that you are doing as a leader to increase adoption? What does that look like?
Well, look, I think two things were our early bets. One, it starts from the top, right? So I don't think anyone ever goes to a meeting with me where I'm not talking about, hey, why did you do it that way? Why didn't you do it this way? Right. And it sort of starts with that. Then it goes into your leadership team. Like if you met my leadership team or our creative director specifically, I bet you he's one of the most AI sort of geeked out creative directors on the planet, just the way he uses tools in his spare time and his coding on the side, you have to have around you folks that are ready to be tops down. And by tops down, I don't mean, it's not like, do as I say, not as I do. It's actually do as I do, right? And you
Yeah.
have to have leaders around you that are going to model that. So that's job one. If you don't have that around you and it's not truly there from the top, I mean, the top is truly not just talking about it, but leveraging it, you're not going to create change. That's job one. And then the second thing that we did was we actually have this amazing ecosystem of founders around us that we're constantly introducing to each other. And we're trying to get in on the early days of a lot of these things, right? When Sierra and Decagon were just starting,
Right.
we were one of their first kind of customers. We're helping adopt that product roadmap.
Are there sort of tangible things that you are, open to kind of share? There are three jobs in your marketing team that you've kind of allocated to, an AI platform and an agentic platform, and how much of that is truly sort of self autonomous versus you still want a human in the loop, Because again, there are some things that robots are great at, and there are some things that humans are great at. So talk to me about sort of, are there specific jobs, and then how do you think about the interplay between robots and humans when it comes to sort of marketing execution?
Yeah, look, so there are some, pretty spicy like things that we can talk about, right? The first one is I no longer have a creative agency on retainer. It's gone. And we spend, as you know, hundreds of millions of dollars a year in marketing, and we're doing this with a fully in-house team. And then people ask me, how big's your in-house team? And I'm like, I don't know, 15 people. It's not very big. And so we are actually, that was the first move, right? It was sort of like, how do we, and actually it was an interesting journey on this one because our in-house team started by pitching on work against external, and they didn't actually win all the pitches at first. And then over
Mm,
time and over the last 6 months, they've actually won some of these RFPs to the point where we don't even RFP anymore. We just give it to the in-house team. And they are doing unbelievable work, right? We don't have agency kind of billable hour fees anymore. Our in-house teams are doing some of the best work of their lives. A lot of people ask me, how do you keep the talent inside Chime of these great, we have the head of strategic planning for one of the hottest agencies on the planet working for Chime now. Our creative director is one of the hottest creative directors from the agency world, right? We bring them in, but we give them the promise of doing, we don't just like farm out. A lot of companies will farm out the really good work and leave their in-house
right.
agencies doing sort of the mundane work. We look at it as different. If we can have tools to help the repeatable mundane work that actually helps our agents, our in-house creatives do the best work of their lives, and it frees them up to do that. And so that's one of the first jobs was like really creating our kind of big moment based creative in-house. And that's powered by dozens of tools, right? We can get into them all,
Right.
but from
Yep.
music, soundtrack, voiceover, generative AI creative, it's unbelievable. So that's job one. A second thing that we're sort of really experimenting with is the next evolution that gets us beyond A/B testing, right? Reinforcement learning is allowing you to kind of break the old experimentation cycles of A/B testing, where all of us struggled with, do we have enough traffic? How many experiments can we run at the same time, right? And so we're a very experiment driven culture. And the more velocity and shots on goals I can get on experiments, the faster I can GA those experiments and get growth going, right? And so we're actually experimenting. One of our jobs we've done is eliminating A/B testing or limiting A/B testing and moving more
Interesting.
to sort of real-time optimizations through reinforcement learnings in our onboarding funnels and things like that. That's been a huge job to be done. That was it's how do you drive growth? You experiment more and you get more shots on goal, and then you increase your chances, right? So we're kind of, if the first one was sort of doing great work at a much lower cost, to build your brand, the second one is about growth velocity, right? So we've done that. And then, we're doing things like we're very intentional about where we're applying agents first, right? Some of our kind of synthetic and agentic sort of use case, our first use cases are with startups that are in sort of the email and web space, right? If you think about email, I mean, a lot of companies are sending, and not just email, but just I'd say lifecycle
Yep.
comms, billions a month, right? Billions of lifecycle connections a month. And so, you think about creatives with this repeatable thing, trying to write every email, write every, text. This is all being able to be done with the agentic solution now. And so we're very leaned in on the first use cases where we feel like we'll have the most training kind of codification where we can help these agents be as successful as possible first. So we're working it in there. And then we're also doing some really interesting things on like synthetic research, right?
Mm,
A couple of weeks ago, we had the first synthetic moderator of a focus group, which was really interesting. Like literally a robot or an agent was moderating a focus group. And then we're creating synthetic research panels, right? Where we're actually getting closer to the consumer than ever because we've essentially trained a synthetic panel with like a decade of consumer research of our segments and our ICP so that we can actually run a media concept test by it and things like that, right? So it's I mean, I could go on and on. It's an
this is
unbelievable
great.
transformation of use cases. We get in really early with founders to help shape the roadmap and really stay at the front end of it. We keep them isolated and then we scale when we think we're ready. And, the other trick in the book is a lot of times we don't just bring in one company. One of the things that's really unique about this is sometimes you want, from a client side, some competition in there, because the truth is it's such early days, and I'll turn around and like look at an SEO company or an AEO company that was doing this, and then the other companies caught up and beat them, right? And it's such like dog eat dog world in this AI startup ecosystem right now that I just don't think you can put all your bets on one horse right now. I think you have to be experimenting with many, creating some competition, getting influence over the roadmaps, which I think helps both the founder and the company. And, you need to scale as soon as you see something working in all these areas.
That was a lot of stuff. So if there's a CMO or a marketing leader listening to this, I think you'd be well served with sort of following the advice, right? Which I took away as there was creative, there was life cycle, there was, experimentation. These were the three sort of big themes. And I think there's a lot of value in sort of deploying agents and doing, lots of the busy work in growth and marketing teams can be done by these agentic solutions. So your actual strategists and marketing teams have the time and the space to think about the big things, which
Right.
are not going to get replaced by AI in the short term. Fantastic. Okay, I think we're coming to a close here. One question that I like to end this with, which is, and it's very tied to your experimentation point. If you had the freedom and no constraints to run an experiment, any type of marketing experiment, no budget, no compliance constraints, what would it be and why?
Well, I'm going to take maybe a little bit of liberty on this one. I think what I would do is, I don't think we're far from like the 5-person billion-dollar startup. How amazing would it be to like basically create an agent sort of first, startup where you are from the start native in this world we're talking about. And, imagine getting to $1 billion valuation, 5 people. We're, if not already, we're probably months away from something like that. And I think that would be a really cool experiment to lead at scale. How do you kind of blend a synthetic workforce with a human workforce, but be native kind of synthetically from the start and just see how far you can go? That would be a pretty cool experiment to run.
I have to ask you about, did you, over the last like 2 weeks, Claude bot, Molt bot, right? So they had to change their name because of Claude. Have you followed that journey? Are you abreast of like what's happening and what's going on there?
Man, I went onto Moltbook, and actually I sent a Slack to our marketing channel on, I think, Saturday night or something. And I was like, you guys have to go. And it blows my mind. It's essentially like a Reddit for agents with like upvotes and downvotes. And some of this commentary that the agents are making about their human partner are just insane, right? And
Yes.
look, I reiterate, today is the worst AI will ever be. And
Yeah.
this is going to be the single biggest platform shift we've ever seen in our industry. I don't look at any of this with fear. I think we're in the golden age of marketing. I think there has never been a better time to be a CMO or a marketer. You just have to embrace these tools, and you're going to have kind of an Iron Man suit as a marketer that you've never had before. And I think that's the way we have to look at it.
Love that. No better way to bring this to a close. Vineet, thank you for spending all this time with us, and very excited about seeing you and the Chime team continue to crush it in the markets. So thanks again. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I learned from it today as well.
Thanks, Pranav. Great to see you, man.
All right, folks. I don't know about you, but I learned a ton from that episode from Vineet Mehra. If you don't already follow him on LinkedIn, go get him a follow. Not only is he an exceptional CMO, he's also generously sharing all of his wisdom on LinkedIn for free for all of you. So go give him a follow and tune in again next week for another episode of Brandformance.